always tell people, like, speak to real people. Do not get your info from social media. So many things are going wrong in Syria now, and like this is understandable. I'm not justifying it. I'm just explaining where it's coming from. There's like a mix of Russian propaganda, Zionist propaganda.
I'm asking, can you see why it might be easy for someone to make certain conclusions about the revolution and about the current administration?
I do see, but do I agree with that?
On the 8th of December 2024, in a shocking turn of events, the Assad regime fell at the hands of Syrian rebels. Now, for many, this was a miracle born out of the Syrian yearning for freedom from tyranny. But for others, this was a conspiracy led by the United States and Israel to undermine the Palestinian resistance and the axis from which they gain support. To discuss this and to sift between the facts and the fiction, I'm joined today by Dr. Sumaya Hamadmad. Dr. Sumaya is an Ohio State University researcher in the Department of Ophthalmology and Vision Science at the College of Medicine. She is also an activist for justice. Dr. Sumaya, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Faris, for having me.
To start off, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your activism for justice in the States and abroad?
Myself, I think I told you before this that I struggle with my identity. Even when you say I'm a Syrian doctor, I am a Syrian who has never been to Syria until after the fall of the regime. I was raised in Jordan. My family actually is from Hama, Syria, and those who know Hama, who are Syrians who have heard of Hama, they know about the Hama massacre. My whole identity actually was painted by the Hama massacre. My grandfather was killed under torture by Assad regime, Assad the father, that is. My uncle was killed in the 1982 massacre. My 4 cousins disappeared, Rahu, in the Hama massacre. So my childhood was all like stories of Hama and why we were like living. I lived kind of very similar life to a refugee, basically, a Palestinian refugee without real identity. I was raised in Jordan for most of my life before coming to the States in 2001, just few months before September 11. And I came as a grad student with my husband. And then I've been living here, since then. I live in Ohio. And as I said, I am a pro-justice fighter or like activist or whatever you want to call it. So I've been any cause, any just cause, whether it's Syrian, Palestinian, Black Lives Matter, you name it. Like I'm always that's where I find myself belonging.
Well, before our conversation, I asked you how you'd like to be introduced, and I suggested human rights activist, and you told me that you prefer the term justice instead of human rights. Could you tell us a little bit about that kind of distinction that you wanted to make?
See, like for me, justice is a value that stems from my belief system. I'm a Muslim, obviously, and like faith, our faith is all stands for haqq, for adl. Allah is one of His names, is al-haqq and al-adl. The word haqq was mentioned in the Quran like over 200 times, and that's where I yearn and identify as. So I'm first and foremost a Muslim, and that's where my belonging is. I mean, human rights have been like so abused and misused and exploited in so many, like it means so many different things nowadays. And like, especially from a Western point of view, like they have used human rights in so many ways to exploit people, to colonize. And then like we realized that all of this was fake, basically. Like they don't really believe in human rights except for, they believe in their own interests. So that's why I did not really want to use that term. But yeah, I like justice more.
And you've done work advocating for not just the Syrian cause, but also Palestine. And in fact, last year you were arrested because of your advocacy work. Could you tell us a bit about what you did and why that resulted in your arrest, and also the arrest itself? What happened during that time?
So as I said, I was raised in Jordan among Palestinians. So like my Syrian friends actually make fun of me here. Like they say, you do not belong to Syria. You're more Palestinians than Syrian. I always like my Palestinian thobe in Eid. So I do feel like Jordan, Palestine is home to me. And I like to remind people that we used to be one country, Bilad al-Sham, before colonization divided us. So like Palestine for me is very dear and near to me. I identify as Palestinian, as I said. And like obviously any Muslim, any human rights, any justice activist see Palestine as his cause. And I have been always part, like since I was in Jordan, whenever there was protests or like any means of supporting the cause, I would partake in it. But specifically when I was arrested, that was exactly a year ago, on April 25, when the students were trying to do encampment during that time on campus at the Ohio State University. So I'm part of the faculty or supporting them, but I was not really involved directly in the encampment. There was an encampment attempt in the morning, and the police came and dispersed it. So I was, walking in campus in that exact area, and like I decided to sit with other friends of mine who are like part of the group that supports the student, and the police officer came, and it was just me and my friend, basically two of us. And he asked me to leave the area. I told him, like, why do I need to leave the area? I'm just sitting here. Like, I was not really protesting exactly. And he said, this is criminal trespassing, this area, you're not supposed to be there. Like, it's an area, the Oval, where everyone goes for lunch and just enjoy the sun. I kept arguing with him. I told him I'm a Syrian, uh, I'm a I'm somebody who fled Syrian dictatorship, and right now I do see a Syrian dictator in you, asking me like you're becoming just authoritarian, and this is what I ran away from. Like, I came to this country for the values it stands for the human rights, the dignity, the rule of law, and I see you not practicing this at this point, and I cannot just follow those orders that do not make any sense. And that's when he decided to arrest me. Uh, I was, taken to prison, like official faculty, the Jackson Pike, and I was, it was not a very enjoyable experience. But alhamdulillah, I was released after 12 hours, and now I'm actually suing OSU over that arrest. So, inshallah khair.
You wrote a piece for the Columbus Dispatch talking about your experience, and you mentioned that you read the stories of people in Syrian prisons at the time to help you get through with that. Could you tell us a bit more about that, please?
Yep. So as I said, my uncle, actually Khalo, my mother's brother, was arrested. He was not technically arrested. He was kidnapped, because that's how Syrians would be taken to prison, and he was disappeared for 10 years, basically. I remember my grandmother used to live with us because she also fled Syria after the massacre, and she was not sure like what to pray for him, what kind of dua to make for him, like Allah yarhamu, like that he passed away, or may Allah release him, because nobody in Syria knows the fate of those who are disappeared, basically. And all you have is those horror stories, which now, alhamdulillah, they have been coming out after Saidnaya prison. I'm sure, like, I'm hoping that many of your listeners and viewers have read those stories of Saidnaya. But we Syrians, especially those who are from Hama, have been reading those stories for the last 40 years. My Khalo was kidnapped in 1981. So those were the stories that we were told about, the torture, like the people who die under torture, and those. I mean, it's really hard to describe, and I hope some documentaries and movies would be made. But those who have heard of the Caesar Act, although like most people like hear about Caesar in the context of sanctions, but those Caesar images, I don't know how many have seen them, tell you a very small part of that story. Like, those were the dead bodies, the pictures of the dead bodies of those who passed or who were killed under torture, under starvation, in the prisons of the Syrian regime. And that person, that hero who used the term Caesar for himself to protect his identity, defected from the army. And he was the one who kind of took all of those images with him, 40,000 images that were documented, that show the horrors of what happens inside Syrian regime prisons, and how those people like died and were killed. And like the stories of rape that takes place in prison. And again, this is all documented. So when I was in prison, in that tiny cell with like 20 other people, and it was there was like literally nothing. Like, there's no obviously no chair, no nothing. Like, I was dressed in the uniform, and I was just sitting and chatting with people, and I was like reminding myself, subhanallah, alhamdulillah, I'm so blessed because at least I can breathe, because I knew from those stories that people who were cramped, like 200 individuals in maybe a 2 by 2 cell, they were unable to breathe. They were like in conditions that even animals would not be able to live in, and that's part of the reasons why they were like, dying from lack of medical attention, lack of breathing. Anyone who would have asthma would die in those cells. So alhamdulillah, I was like, alhamdulillah, I'm able to breathe. Alhamdulillah, I'm able to speak. Alhamdulillah, I'm able to pray, because if you're in a prison, if you talk with your neighbor, you are doomed. So like, even though I requested, for example, a prayer mat or something to cover my head, and they denied it, I was like, alhamdulillah, I made a prayer rug from the toilet paper that was in the cell, and I prayed, and I was like thanking Allah and alhamdulillah that I am allowed to do so. So that's how I was, uh, driving strength from those stories that I've again been raised to read and hear.
So you got arrested essentially just for sitting on the lawn at the university campus. You weren't really involved in the setting up of the encampment.
On that day, I was not involved in any camp. I was not really intending to be arrested. I was, as I tell people, like, I have participated in protests. Like the day before, I was in a protest that was all, like, we were like following the rules and everything. And like, usually, generally, if I want to be part of civic, disobedience, I would, do it. Like I have done it once for Syria. But during that instance, I was not really intending to do any civic disobedience. I was just sitting on the lawn, but the police officer requested me to leave, and I just refused to leave because he had no basis for that request or that ask. I mean, that's the basis of why I'm suing the university, actually.
And it's, to me, it sounds so draconian because why didn't they just, force you off the lawn? Why did they have to arrest you on that day?
I've never thought of this, actually. They could have done that. I don't know. You should ask them because they're so dumb. I mean, honestly, sometimes when you're like an oppressive, you become blinded and you become so ridiculous. Like, why would they come and ask me to leave in the first place? Like, when I came in, the encampment was gone. Everything, like, there was no police officers even. So I decided, like, I was hearing different stories. So honestly, I went there to kind of check what was going on. And when I went, like, there was nothing happening. Like, even there were like some people, like individuals, white looking individuals, like sitting on grass in the faraway region. And I'm like, okay, let's see if we sit what happens. But I was not even wearing a kufiya. Like my friend was wearing a kufiya, but my intention was not really to protest. I was basically testing the waters and seeing what was happening. And that's when like one police officer came and asked me to leave. And I said, like, why do you want me to leave? Like, this sounds like some authoritarian regime to me. Like, it's funny now because we're blaming Trump of being a dictator, but like dictatorship, I was telling my pro uh, Democratic Party friend, like, dictatorship did not start with Trump. When I was arrested, it has all started then. Like, people now who are being picked up by the Trump regime, they are in the database that Biden was, using. So all of those people, like Ahmed Khalil and Mahmoud Khalil, sorry, and the others were like him, or like the leaders of those of that movement, basically, they were targeted by Biden administration, and now like Trump is just exacerbating this and making it more public and more open. But yeah, I was basically arrested for sitting on grass, and that police officer was just too dumb, so he left, and he came back with literally 17 other officers to arrest me. 17. I have all of that on video, actually, because my friend was videotaping at the time. But yeah, you were like, why would you bring 17 people? Like, why would you make the situation more aggravated? Like, this is just so stupid. But yeah.
I'd want to kind of refocus our conversation on the topic I want to talk about today. So it's very clear that your activism stems from a love for justice, not just for the country in which you are born, but very clearly for the Palestinian cause. So you clearly have a very strong affinity to the Palestinian cause and standing for justice in Palestine, and I assume other places as well. Uh, so I just want to begin with your feelings about being, kind of maybe torn a little bit, because there are people who stand very strongly with Palestine who very strongly disagree with your perspective on Syria.
I guess that is the reason why I'm joining you here, because it's really it's so sad to me the amount of ignorance that is. I'm sorry to use that word, but there is so much. I don't know how to describe it honestly, because there's like a mix of Russian propaganda, Zionist propaganda, uh, anti-imperialism. I mean, all of that comes into, and like, which also aligns with pro-Palestinian cause. But that sometimes feels being exploited. Like they exploit that cause to kind of you know, blend into that mix. So it's very interesting when you think about Syria and like the enemies of the Syrian revolution from day one when it started back in March of 2011. I mean, everyone was opposing the Syrian revolution. There is Iran, there is Russia, like, and then all of them were involved. And there is the United States. The United States was never supportive of the Syrian revolution. Israel was never supportive of the Syrian revolution. Like, there's so many documentation that says Assad is Israel best, puppet, or like they want Assad to remain in power, and like Israel, those who work in advocacy for Syria, and I was like part of that group, they know how much Zionists were pushing to keep Assad in power. So when you read about all of this, when you know about all of this, about all the suffering that the Syrian people have to go through in those 14 years to be able to topple the regime. I mean, and you know, your introduction kind of took me back to those like 11 days, which for every Syrian were like kind of a dream. I mean, honestly, or you know, like that Thanksgiving of 2024, I think it will be, you know, in every Syrian mind forever, because when it started, like nobody was expecting that this is what's going to happen, like the Assad regime. We were like so desperate, honestly, uh, back in the after, I guess after 2016, after the regime started like to take control. Not the regime, actually, it was Russia and Iran. Like, I want to be more clear. It was Syria was already divided. It was already colonized and occupied by so many powers, by Russia, by Iran, by America in the northeast, by Israel was also in control. Like, Israel was bombing Syria and Damascus every now and then. I don't know if people were not watching those news before the fall of the Assad regime. Israel, like Syria, was an open target for Israeli targeting. So to claim now that, you know, suddenly people became worried that Syria is going to be divided. Like, Syria has been divided for the last 14 years. If you look at the regime control and like the regions, the maps of control, they're like more than five forces that were in control of those different Syrian regions. Syria was basically occupied and colonized by, again, like Russia. It was destroyed. When you look at the images from Hamas, I went to Syria right after the toppling of the regime. I actually literally a week after. So I was in Syria in December 2024, and it was effectively my first time visiting Syria, and like the amount of destruction, like it was the, you know, that mixed feeling I have at the time. It was just undescribable, because you were so happy and joyous from what's, you know, taking place, and people were celebrating and dancing, but you just stand and look at the backdrop, and it was like all rubble and destruction, and like it was just so surreal and like hard to grasp. Like, how are we celebrating all of this destruction? It was, you know, like you seeing it in over on the screen and over videos, and like even if it was live, is very different from standing on the rubble and like just experiencing it. So and like the vast geography, like how huge the amount, like we see destruction in Gaza, and like I'm not dismissing, but yeah, Gaza is like when you compare the kilometer square, like compared to the destruction in Syria, like every town you go in Syria, like in Hims and Darab. I drove actually from Damascus to Hims, Hama, Halab, Aleppo. I went to Idlib. So along that, it's like a 4.5 hour drives overall from south to north. And like everywhere you go, you see destruction, like complete towns destructed, like Khan, Ma'arat al-Nu'man, or like Abu al-Ala al-Ma'arri, those who know Abu al-Ala al-Ma'arri, where he came from. Like it's a whole town that used to, I think, be a population of 400,000 people. Whole destruction. So like no matter how I try to describe it, and I had so many images, like Syria has been destroyed. I guess my point to make is Syria has been destroyed for the last 14 years. And to kind of suddenly start worrying about Syria now that, alhamdulillah, the Syrians have some sort of hope, I find it very hypocritical, very ridiculous, very, I don't know how to describe it honestly, but do not worry about Syria now. Syria, there is light at the end of the tunnel finally. Like people, Syrian people have hope finally after all of those years of suffering. And I don't think it's 14 years. It has been more than what, 45 years of Assad family rule. And it's since 1963, the Ba'ath Party ruling over Syria. So it's like a whole generations of Syrians who have never seen signs of hope. And now like they're like finally starting to dream of belonging to a country that they can be proud of.
It's very clear that there's quite a few emotions there, hope mixed in with hurt. And I want to discuss the events of last year, the revolution leading up to that. But maybe we'll go first with a brief history of Syria and Syrian politics. Now, you mentioned before that Palestine, Syria, all part of one region earlier, or part of kind of a single administrative region of the Ottoman Empire, you could say.
Yep.
And even from the way Palestinians and Syrians speak, the dialects are quite similar. You could say the Levantine dialect is maybe a one dialect,
True.
and
Food is the same, culture is the
food's the
same,
same.
everything is the same.
Yeah, more or
You
less.
have maqlube, you have
Yeah,
they're all.
I personally think Palestinian Maqlub is better, but
Yeah, I
I don't
agree.
think we'll have
Actually,
that
we do not
discussion
make
today.
maqlube with zahra. We make it more with eggplants. But like, it's funny because also when you go to Jordan, like Dar'a and Ramta, like that, there, it's actually
Yeah,
basically one family, one tribes divided by this
yeah.
border. So
And
I,
even the accents are the same. Like someone from Dar'a or from Huran does not sound anything like someone from Asham or from
yes,
Idlib.
yes,
But they sound more similar to the Jordanian tribes.
exactly.
So it's very interesting. Then, obviously, we had the Sykes-Picot agreement in which they split the region based on the French and British interests, and then there was a kingdom shortly, which was then overthrown, and then you kind of had somewhat of maybe independence of sorts. Could you take us a bit through, if you could, the kind of the stages from the beginning of Syrian independence until the Ba'ath Party took over?
I have to admit I don't really know much about the history from that time of the. I know like general ideas, as you said, which you already kind of summarized them. But I like to emphasize that because the Syrian, Jordanian, Palestinian, Lebanese region used to be one country, and like those nationalistic ideas are only in the last few decades. Basically they did not exist before. Like yes, we belong to regions, but those were like part of a larger, as you said, Ottoman Empire, and it's only after the World War I. So everything I think we're facing now are consequences of World War I and the Ottoman Empire being divided between those colonizing powers, and Syria belonging to the French colonization, and Jordan, Palestine going to the British. And like Wa'ad Balfour came, the Balfour Promise, is it called in English?
Declaration.
Declaration, exactly. And how the British made it easy for uh, the Jewish state to get established. So people, like when you read about that part of the history, that's also associated with the history of that region. Technically, Syria gained independence in 1946, but like colonizers do not leave without planting these seeds for divisions and for like they don't fully leave. Basically no Arab country gained independence fully. Like whatever we're facing now are consequences of that era of colonization. So like it was a very brief period, like between I think 1946 and early 1950s, before like again the Ba'ath Party came in the early 1960s. So like maybe an era of 15 years. And again, like colonizers leave the region deprived of all resources, destroyed. Like if you wanna compare Syria now, like how it's starting from scratch, basically that's how Syria was after the French left. So Syrians were not really given enough time to build those that Syrian I guess, independence or like Syrian identity. Although, like from what I read, like we had some periods of democracy, like election. I had a friend who was telling me, Edward Hashwe, like he's a lawyer. He's actually a Christian lawyer, Christian Syrian lawyer, and he was telling me about the time where they were like writing the constitution for Syria in the 1950, and how they were like, they were Christians, they were Druze, they were Muslims and muftis, and they were like all sitting, and like people now refer to the constitution of the 1953 or 52, I believe, as one of the greatest example of constitution of the era. So we had a very, very brief time of being able to kind of have a way to breathe before the Ba'ath. They call it al-harakat tashihiya. I'm not sure what is it, how to describe it in English, but basically it's a coup. And they came to power, and Hafiz al-Assad was the leader of the army at the time. And gradually, they started depriving Syrians of the very, minimal rights of democracy. Actually, it's also the unity with Jamal Abdel Nasser with Egypt, which took place in 1961, I believe, or see, like I'm really bad with exact dates and history, but it was the end of the 50s and the beginning of the 1960s where that the Qawmiya Arabiya, the Arabic nationalism, was flourishing at the time, and like people were like super excited to kind of join Egypt in one. So it was named Jumhuriyya Al-Arabiya Al-Muttahida, the United Arab
Arab Republic, yeah.
Republic. So that was the time also where like Syrian politics shifted because they were like affected. Abdel Nasser was not a democratic leader, and people were just so joyous about the idea of becoming united. And that's where actually many of the tactics, like Abdel Nasser was more leaning towards the communist camp, if you want to say that. And that's where those ideas and like rules, like even they say some of the techniques of torture, they were introduced to Syria by the communists of that era. But subhanallah, it's all khair. So that's when Syria like started going down that slippery slope, if you want to say, of becoming closer to an authoritarian regime. And then I think the Ba'ath Party took advantage of that. And so if you read more about the details of how the communists or like the socialists, they were trying to impose their ideology on a people who are not used to that. So like when you speak about the iqta'in, or like those who own lands and like their lands being taken away from them to be distributed to the masses and like things like that, that's where people started like hating Abdel Nasser and hating the era of the Arabic United Republic. And that's why Assad and his thugs, I say, took advantage of that period and like that amount of hate and disappointment that people had in the unity idea. And they, he led that coup, and they took advantage of power. And since then, since the 1963, Syria has not really seen any bright day. They took power and they gradually started chipping away. I mean, that's what it's funny, because that's what I was telling my friend who told me, why did you not just listen to the officer and leave the lawn when he asked you to leave it for criminal, like he was threatening me. I told her, because usually rights or like dictatorship does not happen overnight. Rights get chipped away one bit at a time. And if you are not sensitive and you do not recognize the very first sign of dictatorship and authoritarian regime, like you will wake up when it's too late. And this is what we're dealing with Trump. It's funny because I always engage with her in those conversations. She wanted me to vote for Biden, and I told her I could not vote for Biden. I just could not. I did not vote for Trump, but I could not vote for Biden. So those discussions, we have to stand up against dictatorship, against authoritarian regime. And that's what the people of Hama tried to do, like when they started changing the constitution, the Ba'ath Party changing the laws like one bit at a time. The Hamwis are known to be, I guess they have high sensitivity for oppression, and they were the first to kind of protest those. So like when you read about Ahdath Jami' al-Sultan in the 1960s. So as I said, the Hama massacre was the climax of that, but the seeds of that massacre were actually planted in the late 60s, which then led to what happened at the end.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the Wahsh family, or now known as the Assad family. They changed their name in order to not seem so monstrous.
Mhm.
Not that that helped. Um, Now, they are members of a small sect in Syria, the Nusayris, more recently been calling themselves the Alawites
Mhm.
to kind of bring themselves, I mean, I guess, closer to Shia Islam, even though technically speaking, they're not really members of Shia Islam.
Mhm.
How did members of such a small sect or small religious group, which is very secretive, in Syria, come to rule the entirety of Syria, which is over 80% Arab Sunni?
That's a great question. But I think it comes back to colonialism and us not being independent fully. As I said, like when those colonial power leave, like look at India and Pakistan, like how they leave those divisions before they leave the area so they can exploit them and they can keep exploiting those resources of the area and keep controlling the area. It's just like a simple rule, divide and conquer. فرق تسد. It's well known. If you want to control, you just divide people, and that's a simple way of ruling over people. So I think the seeds for those were like planted by the colonizers. They were like empowering, turning people against each other, creating those frictions between people who used to like live together over ages, over like centuries, whether they're Jews, Arman, Shi'i, Sunni, Alawi. So those were like part of that region. So, but I think it was the I don't want to call them like superpowers, but they were, again, I think the Assad took advantage of that time. And there are like so many documentations of him connecting with like the French or the Americans or like whoever was the superpower at the time. And he was willing to kind of offer them any, like he was willing to sell Syria or like offer any. What's the word? Anything they need, basically, anything they want from him, whether it's the Golan Height, which happened later in life, or like a peace agreement with Israel, and so he was willing to do that, and it was just like an interest. So they were like a joint interest. So they found that the Western powers, or like the French or whoever, and then like he turned to the Russia. I think Assad, that the father was really good at taking advantage of situations and like playing. I don't know if this is called diplomacy, but he was simsar. What's simsar in English? Do you know what I mean?
I'm not sure.
Like
Yeah,
somebody who's like willing to sell, and he's good in dealing with ما بعرف الصراحة. I can't really find the term that describes him. But يعني he does not have any principles basically except holding to power and ruling over people. And he was given a green light basically to do whatever he needs as long as he keeps the Western interest and keeps the region. Like how in the West like to deal with only one person, like a contractor. Basically, he was like a contractor. So I do what you need, I maintain your interest, and you allow me to do what I need. So it was like a mutual interest between the two entities,
yeah.
basically.
Current day United Arab Emirates.
Yeah, I guess. Although I think United Arab Emirates has like some genuine uh, gratification for, I don't know, gratification for evil,
Yeah,
more that can be explained by mutual interest. But anyway,
yeah,
that's a different story. But so like he took advantage, like he exploited even the sect of his. Like people think yes, the sect was benefiting from him, but he planted every kind of division among the Syrian people. Like when you look at the Syrian uh, society, it's so divided, not only based on sect. Like Assad regime, and like I think any kind of dictatorship and oppressive regime would exploit every kind of ism, whether it's classism or sectarianism or manatiqiyya. What's manatiq? Regionism. Like people in Syria are just so divided, and it's very interesting because you see it. Like Syrian people, I was raised in Jordan, and I got exposed to the Syrian who lived in Syria and like were raised in Syria, and there's like so amount of distrust among the Syrian people that was really raised and built by the regime. I always like to blame all the problems of the Syrian, community or society on the regime itself. Like I said, like effectively, I went to Syria in after the fall of the Assad regime, but actually I went for a brief visit to Syria in 2009. because my husband was forcing me to go. And he said, like, you have to go visit your country now. Bashar al-Assad is in power, and like he was trying to promote the idea that he's different from his dad. So my dad, before I got married, he would never allow us to go visit Syria. But after I got married, my husband told me, like, let's go try visit blah blah. So anyway, he convinced me, and I went in 2009. And once I crossed the borders, the authorities took my passport and asked me to go to Hama to Raja al-Fara, which means the mukhabarat, the secret service. And those are the ones who would decide your fate, basically. So I went to Hama, and I spent 3 days of my visit, basically, back and forth at Fara' al-Mukhabarat. They asked me to write a Mukhabarat report, like Taqrir Mukhabarat. I don't know if you know what that is. I think only Syrian know what that is. So, like Taqrir Mukhabarat, basically, they want me to be a spy on my dad, because my dad was labeled
Wow.
Ikhwan. And you have to write me everything you know about your dad and your brother. Both my dad and brother were like labeled Ikhwan. So, like, everything, like, where does he go, his friends, his visits, which masjid he prays in. I told him, like, I have been married for 7 8 years at the time, and I do not really live with my dad. I live in the States, and I don't really. You are not going to get your passport back. You're not allowed to leave the country. And I was a postdoc at Yale University. I was a researcher at the time, but I was still Syrian. So I had to go and write a report. And of course, since he's my dad and I love him, I'm not going to write anything that hurts him. But at the moment, I realized, like, why Syrians do not trust each other, because anyone can write anyone a report, like taqrir mukhabarat. Like, say I'm having issues with my boss at work, I can go write taqrir mukhabarat and ruin his life. Like, they would disappear forever over taqrir mukhabarat that says he's ikhwan. That's all they need to say. You don't really need to prove anything. So that's the time where I, like, this is how the Syrian regime, like, really destroyed the fabric of the Syrian society, like, literally. And that's where I became, like, more empathetic, I guess, with the community, like the Syrian community. Like, I could understand where they're coming from when they have those barriers among themselves. And it takes so much to undo the damage that the Syrian regime has done to the Syrian people, basically. So part of, like, again, sectarianism and all of those divisions that he exploited is part of those seeds that he planted in the society to just uh, hold on to power. I mean, that's basically how you describe it. And sadly, now our enemies, the new free Syria enemies, which are the Zionists, basically, are trying to play into this, whether it's in the Sahel, the Alawiyah, the Alawites, and the Ahdat. Like, we have, I'm sure, like, you guys have read and seen what happens in Sahel. Of course, besides, like, so many other like trauma and injustice that took place, but also the Zionists and, like, all the enemies that do not want to see a free, united, powerful Syria are trying to take advantage of all of those divisions that already existed in the Syrian society, and that the regime has done a great job implanting into their, to achieve their goals, basically, of having a weak, failing state, which is what the Zionists want. I mean, they say it bluntly. This is not a secret. It's not conspiracy theory. They're all of their leaders and officers. They, like, yeah, a strong, united Syria is not in the interest of the Israelis, and we need to make sure that it does not happen. So, and anyone who like, who plays into that, whether consciously or subconsciously, whether they're aware or not, they are playing into the Zionist agenda for destroying Syria and not having a strong Syrian state at the time, at the moment.
I'd like to get into the current situation in Syria, but first, you mentioned some quite shocking things about the previous Syria regime. I think more related to the Assad the father and carried on by Assad the son. Now, this is not the image that at least the pro-Palestinian camp, who maybe not supported Assad, but at least saw Assad uh, as a component of the so-called axis of resistance. These are things that maybe they haven't heard of. Why do you think that the Assad regime was able to cultivate an image for themselves as those who support the support liberation in the region?
I think part of it is just like his dad. Assad, the son, was good at playing all the cards. Like he was able to play all the cards that he could play into, maintaining his power and his interest in in like holding on the country. So, like playing the axis of evil, I mean, not the axis of resistance card, was a good thing to get the Iranian support. So again, he was like gaining some power of Iran. Iranians were like huge in crushing the Syrian revolution. And, whether it's Hezbollah or the Iranian, so many Iranian factions and groups who came and like literally participated in massacres against the Syrians. So like Syrians do not hate Hezbollah for fighting Israelis. They do not hate Hezbollah for being pro-Palestinian, although like I have this in between quotation marks, because again, if Hezbollah was fully pro-Gaza and pro-Palestinian, they would have participated in the resistance from day one after the October 7th, because they could have the power to do so. But sadly, like they were destroyed. They waited too long, and this kind of well, I guess that's a different story. Let's
I
not.
think Hezbollah opened the front on the 8th of October, as far as I'm aware.
Was it? Did he like fully enter the bat? Like, not really. Like, I think even the Israelis were shocked from the amount of army and like arms that Hezbollah had, and they were actually kind of not sure if they were going or not. But Hezbollah had much more power to be able to support the Gaza front at the time if they chose to do so. But for some, I don't know, tactics or some
Yeah,
calculus.
as powerful as Hezbollah are, some would say that the situation in Lebanon is far different or far more complicated than the situation in Gaza. For example, Hezbollah is not the actor in Lebanon. There are plenty of actors who would like to see Hezbollah's demise. Specifically some of the right-wing Phalangist Christians or their remnants. So there could be kind of
I mean,
a point to
again,
be
I'm
made
not
there.
really an expert in the Lebanese and those issues, but I think what led me to speak about Hezbollah, like people in Syria do not hate Hezbollah for those facts. Again, we try to kind of uh, decide or like our position based on positions, not based on like Hezbollah being Shia or Sunni, for example. So our issue, the Syrian people issue with Hezbollah is Hezbollah participated in massacres against the Syrian people. And it was part of the reason why the Syrian revolution was crushed, especially in the 1930s and 1914 time period before the Russians got involved. So
2013,
sorry, 2013, 2012. And this is all documented by videos and like documentation of Hezbollah fighters coming to Al-Qusayr, to Himmels, like crossing those borders and coming with all those militias. And sadly, actually, part of the knowledge or the info that the Israelis collected about Hezbollah was from them being exposed in Syria. Like this is again documented. So they exposed themselves because they were like fighting people, like the Syrian people who are not like a real army, and they were like showing their strength on, women and children. So that's the reason why people hate Hezbollah, and that's the reason why people were. I was not one of those people who like celebrated the death of Hassan Nasrallah. I did not want to celebrate something that the Israelis did, but I would say I was neutral. But I could see why people were happy. Like if somebody came and killed your family, would not you like this is a human nature? Would you not be happy when they're killed? Like who cares who kills them? He is my enemy. He killed my son or my daughter, so I'm going to celebrate their death. That's as simple as it is. But sadly, people do not really see the full picture. They assume that Syrians are Zionists, and they build those theories in their minds that are so far from the truth because they do not speak to see. I always tell people like speak to real people. Do not get your info from social media. I do believe that social media now is controlled by AI. Like, this is not a conspiracy theory. Actually, I was part of a Syrian advocacy group, and we were approached by a PR company who would like us to purchase their AI controlled software that can like pay, I think 200,000 or so, which can control the comments on social media based on what you want. So this is something like this is an offer that we received. So social media nowadays is really, it's a mess. Please, I always tell people, speak to individuals you trust, speak to humans who have been suffering. And that's what, my Palestinian community in Columbus have been, like listening and changing their minds. And like now with again, the stories of Saidnaya, those images that are coming up from Syria, coming out of those prisons, alhamdulillah, people are starting to see for themselves that this is not a conspiracy. Yes, some circumstances in the region, Al-Shara, who used to be Al-Jolani, took advantage of, like Turkey might have helped him. I mean, of course, when you're working in a environment that is controlled by superpower, you cannot dismiss the existence of superpower who are controlling uh, the current state of events, basically. So, like taking advantage of, like making those connections. Like I'm part, as I said, of a Syrian advocacy group who always would go to Congress and speak to congressmen and try to push them to lift the sanctions. But if those congressmen are Zionists, I'm not endorsing their positions. So, like, we should be able to kind of, things are not black and white. We should not adapt this reductionist mindset of like you are either with me or against me. There's so many nuances in the middle, like, and there is unlimited shades of gray, and we have, especially in politics, and we have to kind of be smarter than like you're either with me or against me. You can actually have so many different positions, and you can be with Hezbollah. I can be with Hezbollah when he's fighting Israel, and I tell this to my Syrian friends. We support him when they fight Israel, and we are against them when they're in Syria. So it's not black and white, and things are just more complicated than what people are trying to make them look like.
Speaking of complicated matters, we obviously have the Syrian revolution. It did get quite messy. I mean, for us living in the West, especially, the lines were blurred quite a bit. It was very difficult to see or to understand what was going on. But some would say that Iran and Hezbollah got involved the way they did get involved because there was a possibility that the US and Israel would find a way to make the most or to exploit the moment and to create essentially another vassal state as we have as exists in Egypt and the oil rich kingdoms and Jordan. What would your response be to that?
Faris, in politics, there's like what's the saying? I think it's a British saying. There's no permanent enemies, no permanent friend. There's permanent interests, right? So everyone is going to exploit anything basically for their interest. Iran was involved in Syria to protect their interest. Hezbollah was like the arm of Iran, so they were like helping the Iranian propaganda. Assad was exploiting all of the frictions in the regions and all of those complicated positions for his advantage to hold into power. So he does not have any principles. As I told you, like he's a simsar. He was playing any card that he could play. He is willing to sell his closest friend. Like his own sect was so mad at him on the way he left them, on the dawn of October 5th, when the army of Al-Jolani or like Al-Shara arrived to Damascus. So he did not really care. Sorry if I'm missing updates. He did not care about anyone but himself. And when the when it came to him, like he had to leave, and he just made sure that he took his like I think it was 4 airplanes full of all of the things that he stole, the valuables that he stole from Syria. So it's the same thing when it comes to Iran and Hezbollah. So everyone is going to defend their interest. And we, as Syrians, when the Syrian revolution started, it started for justice. It started to get rid of that regime that has been killing and destroying and destruct, like that used everything, and that was inviting colonizers to kind of clutch into power. That was our intention. Like we wanted to get rid of the regime, but subhanallah, I don't know, maybe it's the location of the Syria, the fact that he himself has involved so many players in the region. He just made Syria an open field to every power that would like to, like anyone who would like to kind of uh, صفي حسابات. شو صفي حسابات بالانجليزي? Sorry, I sometimes like
Yeah,
like صفي الحسابات, like they who had issues with anyone else, any enemy,
yeah.
they would just come to Syria. Like Russia is angry at Turkey, they would bomb Idlib. Israel مزعوجة من, like angry at somebody else, they would go and bomb Damascus. So Syria became like just an open field, and this is not what the Syrians were hoping for. But it's Assad who got them into that big mess, because he was just holding into power and he did not want to get rid of it. He invited all kinds of mess into Syria. So And this is why, like, Syrians became, honestly, I am one of those Syrians, although I was like working for the Syrian cause, but the end of, around the 2017, I kind of gave up. Like, who is going to stand up in front? Like, because when the Russians came in, like, Russia is a superpower. Who is going to get rid of Russia and Iran? And like, khalas, Syria became a big mess. And, like, Syrians, I have a sensitivity for the word civil war, just like how people of Gaza, I don't think we should describe this as war. Like, the what happened during the Syrian revolution, it's a revolution that was crushed, and that was, uh, people were, all kinds of power and all kinds of means were used to crush that revolution, including, arming some sects. And but it was never a civil war. When a dictator comes and crushes his own people, that's not civil war. That is iron fist. That is, I don't know, you find any other expression, but it was not a civil war. But it was a big mess at the end. So we kind of gave up, like, no way we are going to get rid of those uh, big powers who are now involved in Syria. And subhanallah, you never know Allah's plan. When He plans something, things just happen. So what happened in 2024 is, again, I think we Syrians became very grateful and appreciating of what people in Idlib, including, Ahmed al-Shara, and how they have been really planning, subhanallah, for that day, including, creating those connections and, like, I guess, dreaming of that day and taking advantage of a geopolitical situation that, subhanallah, changed for this to happen. Like, if the Ukrainian war, like the Russia, if Russia did not invade Ukraine and Ukraine was not supported by the West and the Russia was involved in that war, Russia would not be weakened, would not have been weakened in Syria. And, we took advantage of that situation. If October 7th did not happen and Hezbollah was weakened by Israel, again, it just happened. Like, Syrians have nothing to do with it. They just took advantage of that moment that, subhanallah, Allah planned, we think. And even, like, when I went to Syria, I was talking to those, army men, who are like Quwat al-Aman, who are like security men, basically, who participated in the operation Rad al-Udwan. And I was like, Yani, Jazakumullah khair, what do you guys feel? And one of them told me, I don't believe, oh, I told him, like, I don't believe I'm here. And he said, like, I don't believe it either. And I said, like, what? Like, you participated in this? He said, like, I was part of the army that came and liberated Dimashq. And I still cannot believe it that this is how long it took to, like, free Damascus. We were trained that this is going to be months and maybe years. Like, we are going to take over Halab, Aleppo. And we were told that this might take up to 6 months. That's what they were, like, training to achieve. But subhanallah, there were, like, so many factors that played into that moment, including, as I said, the geopolitical region, that the effort that the advocacy groups that have been doing in the United States, and how much we are pushing. People actually kind of underestimate that, but mashallah, the Syrian lobby in those 14 years have done amazing work. Those connections that they have been building, those, uh, advocacy work that happened, like, it all paid back during that moment. And I can, speak more about this if you're interested. But all of that, the Caesar law and how those sanctions, they also played into depriving the regime from the economic power that he needed. So subhanallah, all of this just came into play for that moment to happen. Maybe it's da'awat al-mazlumin, those who have been oppressed for so long, those people of Saydnaya, the shuhada, ahali shuhada, people who were, like, have been suffering for all those long. Allah just decided to listen and make their dua happen. Like, Allah is qadir. We say Allah is qadir ala kulli shay, but we do not believe when things happen. Like, we have been praying for this moment for my entire life. I've been praying for the Syrian Assad regime to fall. My mom passed away in 2007, actually, and that would have been her dream, to meet her brother in Syria. But subhanallah, Allah's wisdom, for some unknown reasons, he decided that this is the right moment for the Syrian people to reclaim their power. And again, we are indebted to the people of Gaza, whom, without their courage, actually, I think without the October 7th starting and Hezbollah being, deprived of his power, the Syrian people would not have liberated Syria. It's very interesting connection, but Every Syrian would tell you this, whether they admit it or not. Without the Ukrainian war happening, Syria would not have been liberated. So the stars aligned, I guess. Subhanallah. And it happened. And if I want to, like, I'm not lying to you, Faris, if I told you this is the day, the happiest day of my life, I would not be lying. Wallah, wallah, this is the happiest day of my life because nobody was expecting it. You know, when you're the surprises, the happy surprises are the best. Usually, the feeling of that moment, no one like the energy, the joy that came back again in those 11 days. I was mesmerized on my couch. I was not really going to work. I took the days off. I was like, sorry guys, what's happening now is like happens only once in a lifetime. Like people died to see this day happen, so I'm not going to work. Everything was on hold in my life. I was not cooking. I think my kids were thinking I'm paranoid or crazy, but this is how every Syrian was feeling. Every, of course, anti-Assad. Uh, they don't really have to be anti-Assad. Every Syrian, I think, who was dreaming of a free, liberated, prosperous Syria would describe the same feeling. Inshallah, inshallah, that we are, yani, Allah yatammim. Because I'm not really over, at the end of the day, we're realistic. I am realistic that the challenges are big and they are very tremendous. And this is why you see Syrians are trying to protect their, their newborn country with everything they have. Like, I don't blame them. Some people call them, are you shabiha al-shura? They're not really shabiha al-shura. They're just afraid that this dream that they have been, waiting for their entire life, that somebody can come and take it away from them. And that's why you see them sometimes like overreacting. Sometimes they're like irrational. Again, I'm not justifying it. I'm just understanding where it's coming from. And people need to understand, like, I feel like sometimes on social media, I'm trying to mediate between two groups of people who are not really seeing the full picture. And
Mm.
it's sad. But when you go to Syria, the good thing is that when you go to Syria, nobody cares about social media and what's taking place on social media. So
Right.
alhamdulillah, on the ground, things are very different.
Yeah, when I was well, sorry, during that time, I was also glued to my screen. I was very, confused
Oh,
by what was
were you
going
blue
on.
because you're confused or because you're joyous, Faris? You have to to decide what that which
So
camp.
here's the thing, right? So it's
Do you have Syrian blood in you?
we watching the events unfold. It happened so quickly,
Yep.
and at the beginning, it seemed like such a crazy operation to undertake.
Right.
And with the timing, it actually, for a lot of people, seemed quite suspect as well because of the weakening of Hezbollah and choosing that particular time to attack. But obviously, there is the question of must one wait, until Hezbollah's uh, at full capacity for them to attack again. But the situation unfolded so rapidly, and like you mentioned, many Syrians were happy. And at the helm of all of this is Ahmed al-Shar. And I'd like to quickly kind of hone in on him a little bit. Ahmed al-Shar, born, I think, in the Gulf
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah, yeah. Saudi Arabia.
moved to Syria young. And then he left medical school to go to Iraq, where he joined Al Qaeda, which later became, I think, ISIS. And he returned to Syria to head up ISIS in Syria. And then he moved away from ISIS. He joined Al Qaeda in Syria, and then later rebranded to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Now, it's clearly a very interesting CV that Ahmed al-Shar has there. Is Ahmed al-Shar the right individual to take Syria into the next stage of liberation?
I mean, I think that's a question that only the future is going to like he already took us into the biggest, like I'm not gonna say the biggest because the challenges are actually that are coming are the biggest. But so far, I think every Syrian has been amazed of how much he could achieve. Basically, like you judge things based on facts on the ground. He was able, and again, I think even like some superpowers, even some Americans, even the Turkish leader or like leadership were like amazed at how far he could take his army on that. those 11 days of operation of Rad al-Udwan. Maybe he himself was surprised, but that what I want to kind of emphasize, those guys. Well, I mean, I met Ahmed al-Shara when I went to Syria in December. Like like part of a Syrian American group. We met him in Qasr al-Sha'ab, and I guess that was 10 days after the fall of the regime. And I was like, am I really dreaming? Like, we were walking on the red carpet that Bashar al-Assad was walking on just 10 days ago. Subhanallah. Uh, and I was like, يُعِزُّ مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَيُذِلُّ مَنْ يَشَاءُ. So we met with him, and part of the discussion, he was like speaking so proudly of the Idlib experience. So we kind of, nobody was paying attention to Idlib and what those guys were doing in Idlib, and how much I think he proved himself a visionary. Like, he was really envisioning what he wanted to do, like, years from now. So like the way, and if you have been like listening to some podcasts about Syria and like those who participated in building that, although like Syria is not Idlib, but the experience that they gained in ruling Idlib and how they built, out of all of those sects and those factions and all of those fasa'id that they were fighting amongst each other, and like all of the challenges that they were facing from Russian bombardment, from the Iran, they were like able to build a great positive experience of leadership, of governance, of like having, like a real mini state, if you want to call it. So he was speaking proudly about that. And he was like, I was just so, I mean, like funny. I remember like his funny sentence, like, I was amazed at how much the Syrian regime was relying on papers, on waraq, in its, like muamalat and dealing, when you go to nufus, or like even in Idlib, we have automated and we have created all of that clouds, and that's all connected. So he was speaking again very proudly about that experience, and subhanallah, that played into his ability to come and he has something to show. And same thing with building that army, of the army that was able to come and free Damascus. Like, this is a huge undertaking that sometimes we kind of like, especially those of us who knew about the fighting among the Fasa'il in, after the 2016, and when they left, and how much like fighting was taking place, which was really disheartening at the time and was contributing to our revolution being crushed. So knowing all of those details and realizing that he was able to unite all of those fasa'il into one army that was able to kind of move into one direction with all that strategy, yani, you would be ungrateful if you do not, give him credit for that. So he proved himself, at least for that, to achieve that, a leader, a visionary, somebody who has shown things on the ground. Like, we cannot dismiss that. But does that give him credit to kind of that notion that like man yuharrir yuqarrir? Of course not. And like, that's also part of the conversation that I had with him, because I said, like, I have those few minutes to speak to him. What kind of message I want to tell him? So the message I had was, I'm afraid. قلت له أنا خايفة عليك من نفسك and from the people around you, because our people are not, sorry, I should translate English. I want you to protect yourself and from those around, surrounding you. And I'm not speaking about, security wise. I'm speaking about that, our tendency to kind of create dictators. Like, our people are not used to challenge power, especially the Syrian people. Like, our relationship with authority is very complicated, and it's we're not raised to challenge power, or like challenge authority or confront authority, especially the Syrian people in general. And like, they just came out of that oppressive regime. So people are just used to like hypocrisy, to nifaq, to tamsih al-juh, like gaslighting the people in power. So I'm really afraid that you are going to become a dictator. I'm especially living in this palace, like, visiting the palace is just very different. I am someone who has, spoken to different policy makers in the state. Like, we met congressmen and senators, and like, we have met them. But what you see in the palace is just a whole different experience. Like, subhanallah, like, every human being also have that tendency to become a Fir'aun, I guess. Like, Fir'aun is a spectrum, but we all, like, if we feel that we are in power, that we are in charge, those human tendency to control and to not see our mistakes, they kick in. So that's what I told him. And he was like, don't worry. And yeah, I also told him, like, we need to involve women in power because I was very alarmed by the lack of women engagement, whether it's in the last government or in general. Like, we need to involve women. I told him, not as token for the West. We have to believe that women make 50% of the society, and that they have lots of talents and skills, and they can contribute to peacemaking. We have special skills that you guys do not have. So he was actually very, very open-minded, and he said yes. So, and mashallah, the amount of rebranding, I would call it, is amazing so far. He knows what he's doing. Like, subhanallah, he's in France. I'm sure you're aware of that if you're watching the news. And gradually, but again, this does not mean that he is part of the conspiracy that the Americans brought. Like, I am part of the group who works in the United States advocacy group, and I know the challenges. Like, sanctions are not going to be lifted very soon unless Trump decides to do so, because Trump is kind of unexpected. But we do face those challenges, especially coming from the Zionist lobby, because again, the Zionist lobby does not want to see a powerful Syria, and they are the ones who are pushing to keep the sanctions, to not allow him to come or like meet with Trump. They are the biggest anti free new Syria today. And anyone who is over skeptical, like, again, we need to criticize authority. We need to kind of make sure that we are not turning into authoritarian regime. But sometimes, without us realizing, we are playing into the Zionist agenda of destroying Syria, or just being over what's that, like, destabilizing the new state, or all of those synonyms of that word. So, like, let's make sure that we have this balance. Yes, we want to make sure that our leaders are not turning into authoritarians, but at the same time, we have to understand the challenges of the new state and the new leaders, and what the heritage, or the what was left behind by the Assad regime, and how much we have to face and we have to build. Like, I like to describe our state like somebody who has, like, a patient who has just woke up from surgery and they are in the ICU, like Syrians in general, and the Syrian state and the Syrian leadership, and they are still under the effect of anesthesia. So there's like so much to face before, like, because I do see those comments on Facebook, like, what are you doing, allowing Israel to come and invade more lands? Like, what do you want them to do? Like, seriously, I mean, they can, make statements, but do you understand that there's no Syrian army? That actually the challenges of the Syrian government today, interestingly, because PKK is actually armed by the Americans, and PKK is one of the largest and the most advanced weapons in Syria today is the
The
PKK.
SDF, you mean?
What?
The SDF?
The
YPG?
Qasad, yeah. SDF, or like, yeah, which, and the Qasad
I, mean,
translates to PYK. Is it PYK?
I think it's PYG.
PYG. Yeah, sorry, I
Yeah,
I, I mix up those. But I know it's
yeah,
Qasad in, like, the Kurdish militias, basically. So they're the ones who are supported by the United States, and they're like usually getting the most up to date weapons. So this is only one challenge that is facing Ashara. He is deprived of any kind of support because of the sanctions, the economy. Like, what was the economy of the Syrian regime before December 2024? What was the most important source of income? Any idea, Faris?
was it the Captagon?
Exactly. It was drug dealing, Keptagon. Like, it was bringing millions of dollars to the regime at the time. So now, like, the government, the new government, had to close those thousands of Keptagon plants,
Factories?
and, yeah, factories and shipments. So they're depriving themselves also of that resource of income. So there are like so many challenges that are facing the government nowadays, and we really have to be able to see the full picture before we make any judgment and any
Hmm.
label.
Like you said, there were the challenges, many challenges, and very clearly the Israelis are not very happy at the moment with the Sharak government. In fact, they have bombed several places in Damascus. I mean, since the beginning of this new administration, they bombed multiple times. But most recently, they bombed just outside the presidential palace. I mean, from an outsider's perspective, it seems clear to me that the Israelis are not going to allow the Syrian administration to develop any kind of capabilities, whether economic or military, won't allow the Syrian administration to become any sort of threat in the future. So, what exactly are the Syrian administration thinking at the moment in terms of, that you say that they're unable to act, but I mean, the Israelis are not leaving them alone. So, where does that leave them?
Israelis do not leave them alone, but we Syrians are believer that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the qadir ala kulli shay, and He is the best of planner. And if you put your trust in Him and you do what you need to do, the Israelis do not have the final say. Like, we are believers and we know. I remember I once wrote a status of those people who believe that every, like, America controls it, the US controls everything, the Zionists control everything, and like every, subhanallah, like, we believe that Allah is in charge at the end of the day. And yes, those guys, those enemies, are doing everything that they can do to push us away from achieving our goal. But what do we do? Do we just, give in and give up and khalas, Israelis want this? Like, tadafa is an Islamic term. I don't know if you know what tadafa is. Tadafa means pushing and pushing back. Like, it's that battle, like, between the evil and the khair and the shar, the good and the evil. So this, I'm a believer that this is until the day of judgment, that tadafa between khair and shar is going to continue. It's not going to be stopping. And this is what these Zionists are doing in Washington D.C. Like, we know what they're trying to push for, and they take their pushes and their asks to the extreme. But do Americans always listen to them? Like, Americans, again, like, we believe that their interest aligns with the Zionists, but it's not 100% aligned. Like, even the Zionists themselves, there's, the right and left, and they have some disagreements amongst themselves. And we need to try to take advantage of all of those differences to kind of push our narrative and push our interests and make sure that we are doing what we are supposed to do, whether it's in Congress, in DC, whether it's on the ground in Syria, whether it's, on social media. Like, those fronts, we have multiple fronts that we need to work on. And Ashara is trying to do his best. He is trying to, again, one of the discussions that we had when we met with him, like, a big part of his time is trying to kind of maintain unity among his different factions, because again, this army was divided and he united them. Some of them see him as like becoming too pragmatic, like even within the Syrian groups. Some of them are seeing him like not doing enough. So even within Syria, not everyone agrees on what Shara is doing, and like rightfully so sometimes. But we have to also have some wisdom. When is the right time? وَمَنْ يُؤْتَ الْحِكْمَةَ فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. We really need to have some wisdom to decide, is this really the right time to speak about this? Is like our issue, hijab, and like enforcing hijab on women? Like, is this really something you want to, like, a front you want to open? So, subhanallah, sometimes people just need to have patience, and they need to understand that, look at the big picture and like zoom out and like see what our enemies are doing and just try to undo what they're doing. I always tell them, like, see what the Israelis are trying to, push for, and just do the opposite. If you're kind of not sure about what is going, like, see how much the Israelis are trying to not allow sanctions to be lifted. So that's why you need to lift the sanctions, because I know even some Syrian activists think that sanctions should not be lifted, fully, because we have to test a shara, like, because we cannot really trust him fully. Like, we hear this from Syrian groups. And like, really, is this where you want to play into the Zionist, propaganda, and like, oh, this is not the time to lift the sanctions? You lift the sanctions, and then you do what you need to do internally to prevent Shara from becoming a dictator. Like, you have to believe in your people, in yourself, in the means that are available. Alhamdulillah, like, now we have freedom to speak, to talk, to form different political groups and organizations. So let's use those means to our advantage, and let's make sure that we are not aligning with the enemy and with the Zionists, and with the, we're not being played by them without us being unaware of that.
Speaking of Zionists and the advocacy work for Syria in Congress, there was a video that
Joe
surfaced.
Wilson.
Yep, Joe
I
Wilson.
guess
Yes, he was.
without you saying it.
So Joe Wilson is a Zionist who supported the genocide in Gaza, And although he has been a an advocate for so-called Free Syria, uh, I mean, you'd expect certain amount of distance to be kept, between the Muslim Syrian activists and a congressman like that. However, a video did surface of some Syrian activists holding or carrying him on their shoulders, a slap in the face to Palestinians, especially those who support the liberation of Syria from the Assad regime. Uh, what are your comments on that, or how did you experience
Yeah.
that period?
I was in that room, by the way, and I was grateful I was not in the video. I think I did touch base on that, Faris, when I spoke about the uh, complexities of politics and the nuances that we have. It's not you are with me or against me. When those activists, although I felt like this was an extreme way of celebrating, but like, subhanAllah, it was something that was not planned at all. And it was like in a closed room. I don't think that people like were hoping or planning to have it, broadcasted all over the social media. And subhanallah, whether it's the enemies or people who have like good hearts, but they were offended by that. And I know like so many Syrian activists actually wrote apologies for those who were like disheartened or like hurt by that video. But again, that moment, they were celebrating that person's what he did for Syria. And we know what he did for Syria does not stem from his love for Syrians. Again, you really have to understand that politics is complex. We were taking advantage. Basically, he hates Iran. And that's where we found this overlap between our interest and their interest. Like every Syrian in that, well, I'm not going to say every because you cannot say every. 99% of those Syrians in that room participated, like maybe not in protest, but they have supported Palestinian cause in one way or the other. I know like 90% of them, and I know where their hearts are. And I know that they are all pro-Gaza and pro-Palestine, and they would wear their kufiya up high. All of them are pro-Palestinians. And this is why I would like people to kind of give others the benefit of the doubt, like dig deeper than that moment. Obviously, we're not celebrating his Zionist positions. We are aware of his Zionist positions and we hate that position. But what was celebrated in that moment, and again, those who have been working in the Congress for 14 years, they know the challenges of Hamas. Like you can talk to like policy leaders like Muhammad Ghanem. He has always, he writes on Twitter and Facebook. And like he wrote specifically about that moment because he was part, I think, one of the people who were holding Joe Wilson on his shoulder. And he was like explaining how much of a challenge was it for them, the Syrians, to work in advocacy work over those 14 years, like we, especially in the 2016, 2017, where you have the Zionist lobby opposing you, have the Emirati lobby, you have Iranian, like you have every kind of lobby opposing your work, the Russian lobby. And you were like so alone. And you were like trying to find anyone who supports you. And like, the Syrian issue was not, it might be like easier to gain support from congressmen than the like say Palestinian issue, but it was not like a trendy issue, like especially in the 19 sorry, I keep saying 19, I'm stuck in the 1900s, I guess. In the 2017, 2018, like khalas, the Syria cause kind of died and nobody cared about Syria anymore, like especially when the Democrats came. Democrats are usually not opponents of intervention. Like Obama was, Syrian people really hate Obama and how his policies led to Russians getting involved in Syria. Anyways, so that moment, like Joe Wilson was one of those supporters of the, like he was one of, I believe, I'm not sure if it's the Caesar bill, like finding a co-sponsor of the bill, something that takes years sometimes, like of going back and forth and doing visits and paying money and fundraising and doing all of this. So when you find somebody, a senator or a congressman who would be willing to put his name and co-sponsor a bill in Congress that would end up, becoming the sanction bill or like, the Caesar bill, it took years. And that person, that congressman happened to be one of those, co-sponsors of those bills, the Keptagon bill, like any bill that was anti-Assad. Again, it's coming from his hate of Iran, hate of Hezbollah. It's just an overlap in our interest with him. People like wanted to kind of just say thank you to him. Again, it was in a closed room. That video was not intended to be broadcasted. We were specifically thanking him for that specific act that he did. And nobody, I don't think anyone was thinking about, hurting the Palestinian uh, uh, people's, feelings. And as I said, many people like did write apologies, and it was shared like all over social media. But yeah, again, when you think about like how does a video like this become, like, how do trends start, like especially social media trend? I really would like, I'm studying, like I was studying digital marketing the other day, and I would really like to start a project about digging deeper in how those trends start and who starts them with that intention of dividing our community. Because that was a big, like even the Syrian community among themselves, like some people were, especially the younger generations who have been part of the pro-Palestinian movement on campus, they were like, how dare you do this? And like, I got lots of, alhamdulillah, I was not in the video, but I was in the room, and I was in that event, and I was promoting, because this was like a very tiny, like maybe a 5 minutes event out of a 2 day event, speaking about transitional justice, like the work ahead, what we need to do about sanctions, about the economy. It was like a 2 day event. And that, what was it, 2 minutes video? Like it took over all that work that was done. And yeah, sadly,
I
that's what
think
people see.
partly it might be because for the duration of the revolution, the war in Syria, many members of the Palestinian resistance may have uh, uh, been quite friendly with Iran, with, for example, Qasem Soleimani, with Hezbollah, and they received quite a heavy amount of criticism for how friendly they were.
Hmm.
And so, there would have been a sense that, well, there was criticism
Hmm.
given to Palestinian actors when they made, made connections politically
Hmm.
because of the situation they were in, and surely then the Syrian or pro liberation of pro free Syria camp should also receive that kind of criticism.
I 100% agree with you that the double standard sometimes, I mean, is clear. But, also we really have to, yeah, I see your point, and this is what I was using, kind of, because as I told you, like that, my double identity between the Palestinian, the Syrian camps, if you want to say. So I do speak with Syrians themselves. Like when you criticize the Palestinian resistance over dealing with Iran, like we do understand that those folks need that dealing. So we understand where they're coming from, and their interests overlap, and we have to give them the benefit of the doubt. And that is the same language I use when I speak to Palestinian about, understanding where those Syrians come from. So we really have to understand each other challenges and struggles. But sometimes we like of lump sum all Syrians in one basket. Same thing with all Palestinians. Like I have never criticized Palestinian resistance for making connections with Hamas. Like even when I was hurt by them, uh, when they were like saying about Sulaimani, Shahid al-Quds, like he is the martyr of Quds or Al-Aqsa. I was hurt actually not by them, but by the circumstances that led them to do so. I mean, that's what really hurt me, because they were like left so alone that this is their only source of support, that they had to do this. Because I know where their heart is. I know like that, resistance groups, they had, like those who supported the Syrian revolution, they had to leave Syria, and they had to make so many sacrifices to be on the Syrian revolution side. So I was like so disheartened by the circumstances that made them having to praise Soleimani. And they know, like I know that they know he is what he did in Syria. But أحيانا it is those circumstances that hurt the most, not what they said. So that way you try to explain to your like Syrian folks, you guys, like even when like Syrians were celebrating over like joyous by the شو اسمه هذا البيجر pager thing, I could not celebrate. I mean, that part in you, like, yes, I want to see Hezbollah weakened, sadly, because he is part of the reasons why. But Hezbollah was also fighting, like, whatever the reasons, like, whatever his motivation is, like, whatever he was doing, insignificant was what he was doing. people of Gaza were happy for those, few rockets that were falling. It was like the only source of hope. And for that, I wanted to support Hezbollah. I was
Yeah,
afraid to.
and not only that, but those pager attacks, they hurt quite a few women and children
Did
who are
they
not involved.
really?
You know, the
Yeah,
children
yeah.
of
And
people.
again, I was against those attacks, and I know like some Syrians were happy with them, and I do not agree with that. And I was like, nobody celebrates also this cowardly act. Like even if he's your enemy, this is not the way you kill an enemy. Like I'm against act of, bombing. Even if you like you wanna go bomb Bashar al-Assad, you go like have a. Subhanallah, we become so desensitized and like so normalizing those acts of, war crimes, like because it has become so normal, like using drones. I don't want to use drones even against my enemies because like drones is not a, it's a cowardly way of killing your enemy. Like sadly this warfare of today is just again making us, well, anyway, that's a different discussion. But yeah, I was against the pager attack because it's cowardly, and it's as you said, targeting people in the markets, people like some women and children were affected. But like I do see, like Syrians were celebrating the death or like the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, but I could not celebrate. I myself could not celebrate that. But I do. So it's that, I was describing my conflicting feelings when I went to visit Syria. That was also one of those moments of a huge
Mm,
conflict. So, like, where do you stand? Like, what kind of feeling? I could not celebrate the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, definitely, because, the Israelis were, because the people of Gaza, who are my people, were like hurt by that because he was, doing something that would bring them hope. So, again, I guess we're living in times where it's just things are so complex. But I
mm,
think if we speak and talk to each other and like see where each person is coming from and the complexities of these, like that drawing where you see the 6 and the 9, like one person standing at, the 6 written, one,
right.
one, one person
Different.
reading it 9, one person seeing it 6, and they're both right. So like every situation has like two sides of the story, and we really need to see the full story, and we need to speak to people and see where they're coming from, their feelings, how much they're hurt. And I really,
Mm,
again, appreciate those Syrian activists who like wrote apologies on Facebook over that video of Joe Wilson being celebrated because they felt that their brothers and sisters were hurt. And I do appreciate like people. I have a friend from Gaza who would, kind of argue with his own people that Syrians have suffered from Hezbollah like during the war. Allah Jazir Khair. Ahmed Abu Tayma, he is, a great thinker, mashallah, from Gaza, and I love to read his. He is so he has so much clarity, and he would
mm,
always explain those complex things, and he would argue with his own people, like people of Syria has the right to hate Hezbollah, and like how hard it is to say this in Gaza. So we should have the courage, the moral courage, to be able to confront our own people when they do something wrong, and we should have the benefit of the doubt when we're seeing people from the, I'm not going to call it from the other side because Palestinian people are our people, but people with like a different vantage point, like a different point of view, and
yeah.
look at things from their perspective and try to see where they're coming from, especially if we want to be treated that way.
Mm,
Speaking of the us in Congress and the US, but we Syrians love Palestine as much as Palestine. Like Syrians, I always like to say that Izzuddin al-Qassam was a Syrian from Jabli al-Qassam, after whom the resistance fighters are named. He is a Syrian from Jabli who used to fight the French colonization in the 19 I think 30s, before moving to Palestine and fight the British colonization in the 1930s. Like he fought both, and
mm,
he saw both at the enemy, and his name was used for the Palestinian resistance fighting Israel. So we really need to see the enemy, our enemy, as one, and we need to see our causes as one. The fight against oppression is not any different from the fight against occupation. And unless we see that clearly, no one is going to be free. They're not going to
mm.
be a free Palestine without a free Syria, and vice versa. So we really need to see our struggle as one and not allow those, you know, enemies, whoever they are, whether Zionist or not, to kind of plant those seeds of division among us.
Right, but between the debacle with Joe Wilson, between that and the concessions that the Shara government has made with hinting that they might normalize with Syria. Normalize with Israel. They've hinted that they might normalize with Israel. They've arrested members of the Palestinian resistance in Syria, and they've been up till now very quiet and tame when it comes to the Israeli attacks on Syria. At this stage, can you see why people might have the view that this might not be, or this government, this group of people might not be in the best interest for the Syrians and the Palestinians?
I would like to go over what you just mentioned. Like, Shara hinted that they would like to normalize. Is that what you used? Can you tell
Yes.
me? Can you tell me where this is coming from?
So
You know the
reports
source.
came out, multiple reports. I don't have the sources with me,
The
but
source is actually an article from the Jerusalem Post
right.
and from another like American publication, and they were using what the congressman Mills, who just came back from Syria as part of the first Congress delegation, two people like I forgot the other statsman. Uh, he came back after meeting with Shara, and that's what he said. Like Assad is Shara is open to the idea of normalization. So that was his perspective, an American congressman perspective that was picked by an Israeli journal or like an American journal or like American media. And this is how he saw things. The Shara and the Syrian government have not really mentioned explicitly that they want to normalize with Israel. I think the only شو اسمه, when Shibani came, they said under the right circumstances. Like Shara has been very diplomatic and very political. Like he is somebody again who really impressed so many Syrians by how diplomatic he has been. And like politicians, they have only certain wiggle room where they can work from. They cannot really say everything that needs to be said or do everything that needs to be done. So sometimes like people are taking things out of context, like Syrian government and the Syrian Shebani, the شو اسمه secretary of state. He mentioned that we are not going to make enemies with anyone, and we would like to abide by those agreements. The agreement of the 1974 about Golan Heights. They're saying that we're not going to start a war with Israel. Like Israel, like, yes, it's attacking us, but that is what anyone in their situation would do. Like, what do you guys expect them to do? Like, oh no, we're
But the neutrality of the Syrian administration has allowed for people to fill in the gaps, if you will,
the
with
what? What's the first word you said? The
the
neutrality. Oh,
neutrality
the
of.
neutrality. Okay. So again, like I mean, they had not been neutral, but people like choose to like read and see what they want to see because people have an idea. And I think it's that confirmation bias that plays into that. We're like inclined to have that confirmation bias. When you read about like the Syrian government have issued so many statements denouncing the Israeli and asking all of those players in the region, and they have been like asking all of the mediators to stop. Like they've been talking with Erdogan, like those phone calls between Erdogan and Trump. I mean, it's not coming from vacuum. So they have been doing so much stuff in the background, and also like they have issued so many statements, but again people do not choose. When Ashara went to Qahira, to Cairo, he was the only Arab leader to speak about the injustice that people in Gaza are facing, about the Palestinian cause. He was the only one, but again people choose to like pick and choose whatever they have in mind. Like Ashara is supported by the United States. He is part of that, and he is going to normalize because they have this idea that Assad was muqawim mumani, and they're going to look for anything that confirmed their bias. I think that's part of the story. We are not looking objectively at any like news media to start with is not objective. When people use like sources as Jerusalem Post, like I'm sorry, this is an Israeli propaganda publication. Like, how would you trust their sources to start with? Every news media has an agenda, and we can't just take them. I mean, I have been part of so many interviews over the last 14 years when mostly American media sources. And it's funny, I came to learn when the interviewer come to interview you, they have a story in their mind, and whatever you say, like I would speak for 15 minutes, they would take maybe 30 seconds of those 15 minutes to kind of fit that narrative, no matter how I try. Like especially when they want to publish or broadcast, within a day or two. Like, they don't really have time to look deeper. They have this story, and they wanted to make sure the story comes out on time, and this is what they have. So, like, rarely where you would see a reporter who is like willing to sit and listen and learn. And even if they do, they would not really mostly publish that. So most of those media outlets, whether especially the American media, they have an agenda, whether it's right or left or pro government, that is so many times depends on who is the editor in chief, who is the think tank that they're getting their info from, who is the one who owns the organize the corporation. So there's so many factors that play into that news media that end up in you know the final. I'm sure, like, I'm Faris, this, you are in media, and you know that more than me. So I'm just trying to tell the audience, like, it's whatever you read in media is not always the objective scientific experiment. Like, I am in science, like, even scientific experiments, there's so much bias in science. Like, there's so much data that's not published, there's so much data that cannot be reproduced, because whatever data that the I'm sorry, I should not say that about science, but science has lots of rubbish, and there's lots of, publications that do not make any sense, that cannot be reproduced. But I'm just using this as a way to say that humans tend to be biased, and we're hardly objective, and we should aim to be objective. That's where you have to find the truth and the haqq, and work to be on the haqq side, outside, like, of those baggages that you have, of those biases that you have. Try your best and try to listen and have an open mind, and that's where you're
But
going to be like.
it seems like Ahmed al-Shara is not really doing himself any favors, especially with arresting Palestinian resistance fighters.
I mean, honestly, I don't really know much about the arrest circumstances, but like, if those, do we know, like, where those, because he has been arresting so many pro regime, like, people who have been participating in, like, massacres or torture chambers, or like, do we know anything? I'm sorry, I'm not saying that those were part of this, but so many people have been arrested and just, like, investigated and then released. So there might be taqrir mukhabarat. No, I'm just kidding. Hopefully there's no mukhabarat anymore. But I don't really know much about those details of those arrested.
My
If
point
you
being is that the situation that we find ourselves in is that there are circumstances, whether it's statements or lack of statements, whether it's arrests of particular figures, that do paint one particular picture, like you said, with confirmation bias. But I'm asking, can you see why it might be easy for someone to make certain conclusions about the revolution and about the current administration?
I do see, but do I agree with that? No, I do not. Like, that's why I would like people to challenge their perspective, challenge their bias, and, like, see the full picture. Like, if you want to see Ahmed al-Shara as a dictator, you can actually find some acts that prove he is a dictator. If you want to see him as a leftist, or like a conservative, of like becoming, he is like too conservative for some groups, he is too lenient for others, he is so again, we really have to look at the bigger picture and see that there might be mistake. I'm not defending him. Like, he, so many things are going wrong in Syria now, and, like, this is understandable. I'm not justifying it. I'm explaining where it's coming from. This is a society that have just come out from 50 years of dictatorship and oppression and division and all kinds of corruption. I mean, do we expect things to just resolve themselves overnight, or like over? If it takes us 10 years, we are, grateful, because we have been suffering for 50 years, including, like, those injustices that might have happened against the Palestinian. But I mean, there's so many injustices actually that are taking place among Syrians themselves. Like, do I agree? Like, what happened in the Sahel, the coastal area, the Manat al Alawin, there are, like, so many things that went wrong. But again, understanding where the problem is different from justifying it. Like, Ahmed al-Shara does not have full control of over those all of those factions that he has in Syria. The chaos that we still are suffering from, the lack of, like, the arms that are spread, in people's hands, the economy, that inability to pay the salaries for individuals, the destruction, people not being able to go back to their homes because their homes are destroyed. There's like so many challenges, and I do see where he's trying to focus on, providing security and like a way of living. When I went to Syria, Faris, you can't believe it. طبعا, as I told you, Syrian people don't really care about anything that is taking place on social media, at least in December and January at the time. Syrian people are looking for food, basically, and for sources of warmth. Wallahi, I don't lie when I tell you the feeling cold, feeling cold that I experienced in Syria in those 10 days, never experienced in my life, because people cannot find, and like those people I'm talking about, I did not go to mukhayamat or like refugee camps. This is my family who is considered part of the middle class, like upper to middle class, like the people I visited in Halab and Hama. People are living in like such cold conditions that I was like shivering the whole time. I was like in layers. Khala was like, let me get you another blanket, like 10 blankets, and you cannot like make wudu, and you have to really imsah on your socks because it's so hard to wash with that cold water, because his water heater was actually hit by because it was just like 10 days after the liberation, and like they were like Aleppo received some bombing right during the liberation operation. So they have no sources for fuel to warm waters. They have like, they can barely make it, like the amount of inflation in Syria and how much the prices, the crazy prices. Nobody can afford to live in Syria unless they have outsource, like some outside source of income, like I don't know, a relative or son or daughter who can send them. So like the situation in Syria is like beyond, really, it was shocking to me. Although I am someone who has been following the news of Syria every single day, it was just shocking to go and live. The amount of like dukhan, like you feel the country is like, was stuck in the 1970s. Like the cars are so old. The smoke that was coming from the cars, like you feel like you're in a museum for cars. Like it's not like real. So subhanallah, everything that I experienced was so eye-opening to me that guys, like the guy is trying to kind of just make life slightly livable. I know this is not, maybe like he is doing mistakes. Again, I'm not trying to portray a picture that he is an angel or something, but what he has to deal with is just beyond imaginary. Yani Allah ya'ino. This is why like I really pray for him, like Allah ya'ino, like where is he going to start? Like if I were, I would not wish my my enemy what he has to deal with, because what he is dealing with is just very, very challenging is not even the word to describe it. So give him just some benefit of the doubt and know where the Syrian government, like the people of the Syria, like I know many of those, people who are in the government now, like the الوزراء, شو الوزراء?
Members of parliament in the transitional
Yeah,
government.
ministers. No, like الوزير اللي like
ministers.
what is it?
Ministers.
Ministers is the wazir, yeah. So the ministers that they were hired, like I know them. I know that they're good people. I know that they're trying. I know where their heart is, but just be patient. Because like a free Syria, a strong Syria is in the interest of Palestinian people. And you know who sees this? Our enemies are the one who sees this the most clearly. The Zionists are the ones who see that a free, liberated, strong, prosperous Syria is a big threat for the Zionists. And that's what they're trying to prevent. And we, people on the other side, need to see like a powerful, strong Syria, prosperous Syria, as an asset for the Palestinian cause and for the justice cause in general, inshallah.
I think that's the perfect tone to end on. Dr. Sumaya, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a very interesting conversation. I think a very necessary conversation as well, considering the kind of discourse that's taking place. And we can only wish the best for the Syrian people. And we hope that, the administration doesn't let us down. Thank you so much.
Allah Jazak al-Khair. Thank you, Faris. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Again, like I really hope that people would use that as a time to kind of reflect and think deeper and confront our biases and like talk to people more about their issues, where they're coming from, their feelings. Inshallah, again, seeing this from the eyes of the enemy, from the lens of the enemy, can give us a different vantage point. And that would allow us to, inshallah, work as one people to free Syria and free Palestine and free our region, because not only Syria and Palestine are occupied, actually, you know that. So inshallah, this is the beginning. Like a free Syria is the beginning for a free Palestine, that hopefully we will see. I was telling, like, if we were able to see a free Syria, now I have more belief that I can see a free Palestine in my lifetime, inshallah. This is how much hope the free Syria gave us. And inshallah, although despite all of the current situation, Gaza, may Allah relieve their pain. But inshallah, when you look at the big picture, we are heading in the right direction, inshallah. And we will see a free Palestine very soon, bi'Iznillah.
Inshallah ta'ala. Thank you so much.
Thank you.